two questions. The first is primarily for Phil and Katie in terms of corporations that are the corporate perspective, and the second more for Judith in terms of some of the comments you made. And the first is really taking up from Mark's finishing point, product innovation and then business model innovation. If one were to add the third piece in this, which is the revolution that has to go on within the top management of any corporation that is going to be having to try to do what Christian mentioned at the beginning, to get all the pieces of this business model canvas to work seamlessly with each other. That isn't really how corporates tend to work, because the departments are huge and so they don't operate very close to each other. I had an extraordinary experience of trying to work with UN Habitat in Nairobi, where it's half a mile's walk between the finance and the housing and the infrastructure and the other bits of the same organisation to get them to all collaborate together. So my question for you is really, what's been the experience in IBM of trying to be this hub person for getting all the different pieces that need to come together seamlessly for your initiatives to work for the BOP? And if I can throw out my second question so you've got time to think about it. I'm a great fan of Shell Foundation. And it was really the last comment that you made about the drag factor on the social enterprises that you're supporting, having to also pour in the support for the infrastructure that needs to go with it. And nobody's really talked about that today as a sector that needs its own funding, and also that has the opportunity for business model innovation for many of these social enterprises to pitch in together for making a distribution system, or making a BOP-specific marketing system, or an awareness thing that works appropriately with people who don't read or write, or whatever it is. And I just wondered what your thoughts were of offering support for those of us who would like to try and develop some BOP-specific infrastructure to help every single social enterprise to not have to do that part too. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I'll briefly answer the first bit of your question before talking about the internal challenges. But I clearly see that a lot of these problems cannot be solved by any one of these organisations alone, and it really is. I mean, it's probably an obvious point, but it is a collaboration between them. So in terms of how do you galvanise IBM, that, like many large organisations, has its own silos and politics to contend with, you know, you've got the added complexity of finding new partnerships that you don't necessarily, have a traditional history with. So my positioning was to show that there is real advantage by collaborating with the third sector, both for IBM, and for good, sound business reasons, as well as for forwarding the goals of hitting those Millennium Development Goals. So, as well as being a good corporate citizen, it is about opening up opportunities. And I'll give you an example of how that might be illustrated. M-Pesa is, everyone's pretty familiar with the story. You know, when it got to a certain stage of maturity, and it was in the early days backed by socially minded money, but then it became a very vibrant business model, and Vodafone and other private sector parties did very well out of it, and IBM's technology then enabled it to scale up at the appropriate moment. So every organisation has their part, from the business model innovation that was influenced by academia, to the entrepreneur that got it moving in the first place, to the social money that got it over the first mile, the first second mile, to the investors that allowed it to scale, and then the corporations that can expand it. So my point is everyone's got their role to play. Within IBM, it's a challenge, but the key is making the internal case not actually on CSR grounds. It's making it on business grounds, and that is the way you get scale within a large corporation. Otherwise, you know, you will be sidelined as part of, you know, a vibrant but restricted CSR bit of the business, as opposed to making it part of your core. And that's the same argument when we're talking to our corporate clients. You know, you have to appeal to their desires to grow and have sustained growth in the developing markets. And you see a lot of FMCG companies and mobile phone companies now really looking at the developing market and the base of the pyramid as their growth for the next 20 to 30 years. So it's in line with self-interest as a business model.
Yeah, can I just add very slightly to that too as well? Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of thinking going on about how to actually engage corporates in any kind of joint ventures to really understand what benefits can be brought. And there's a lot of nervousness on both sides, and we've done some research for organisations who are really keen to look at how they can pair up and open up their opportunities so that they engage much more with the social benefits that other organisations would bring. Very difficult once they get past the conceptual idea to the implementation idea. And I think that's back to your point that Judith's going to speak to about the sort of intermediary role and who brokers that and how to make it happen at any scale. If you just keep it at pilot level, it doesn't make significant change. And we again found the only way you could even begin was exactly your point, Phil, was to talk to people, investors and NGOs and corporates. If you can't get it from the top, you won't make it happen.
Actually, I was really more looking at the internal questions within the corporate. If we take the Envirovic example that Judith gave, they've got a number of challenges. A marketing challenge, and well, they had an engineering group designing the product. They've done that fine, but they were involved. Then they've got the marketing people, and then they've got distribution people, and they've got finance people who've all got... So I just wondered, back to either of you, whether you've had to kind of knock heads together within different departments within the organisation to make some technology of mobile kiosks or whatever you might have been involved in for a BOP product to get to market, to get its affordability, the distribution, any of those things, and how do you do it?
Well, I can very quickly respond to that. I mean, there are structures within any organisation that cut across all the functions. So within IBM, Smarter Cities is how you line up all of the functions behind making cities more efficient and their economic prosperity. So, you know, work that we partner with Sunderland, which, if you believe the mayor, is the smartest city in the UK. And very much from the beginning of that relationship, it was about driving economic development in Sunderland. Now you can cross that and compare that to exactly what we're doing in Rio. Exactly the same objectives: make the city more efficient, predictive weather patterns, so they know when mudslides are going to happen. Running the water system so that they're not sewage links and it's more efficient. But that was a natural home, if you think about it, for a slightly broader, inclusive economic development part of the story we've been talking about today. So it was about finding a home where it's relevant and cuts across the functions.
GSK has got some quite interesting examples too, and they run on incubator processes, and you have a sort of series of incubators. If the model doesn't work, doesn't stack up after 3 years, you ditch it, start again. You take it through, you have a horizontal team who approach every different part of the organisations involved, and then they put it through its tests, and then take it out if it's not showing success. So there's some models there, I think, to build into.
To answer your second question, and as I've been trying to formulate an answer in my head, I have been coming back to the phrase that Phil brought into the conversation of enlightened self-interest. I think at the end of the day, this infrastructure piece, and by infrastructure to me I'm not necessarily meaning hard infrastructure, I mean all the pieces that need to sit around a business. It's possibly a slightly harder question because it's a less obvious piece. It goes behind the products and the services that are more visible. But you still have to look at it in the same way, that there are parts of that infrastructure that can be provided in a commercial way. There are businesses that are appropriate, that can make returns as well as providing that social infrastructure. And I'll give you a couple of examples of ones that we're engaged with. There are corporates engaged in part of that. And then there are some of probably the pieces that are more appropriate for either foundation or NGO money, or going towards government and saying that these are things that need to be provided. But in every single one of those cases, I come back to who are you asking to support / finance this, and what does it give back to them? So, for example, around the EnviroFit example, I mean, it became very apparent to us that EnviroFit, trying to run a business end-to-end, developing things, marketing and getting to a last-mile consumer, they couldn't be good at it all. And we worked with them to convert into a business-to-business model. But we now have a number of grantees who do the piece, which is the business-to-consumer. And we have one very particular one in India that we're backing very strongly called Dharma. And Dharma are all about last-mile solutions to customers, and they create village entrepreneurs to be those hubs and spokes. And it will be a profit-making business. So in terms of funding them, we're working with them on their business model, on their training, on their systems. So that is a case of finding a gap, finding the right entrepreneur to fill it, but it can be a commercial solution. In Africa, we're partnering with Unilever, because part of Unilever's business is about getting nutritional and sanitary products to customers. And it makes a lot of sense if you're providing food products to people that, stoves sit well with that. And we've developed a collaboration there because they have a business interest in getting to those customers. A number of the financial products that form part of the infrastructure, we've kicked off with foundation and grant money with the intent to demonstrate that they can either be commercially viable, so you get more commercial investors in, or that you will create a greater impact by revolving development money and foundation money. So, for example, in order to get products that have a development impact, a social impact, so water filters, stoves, solar lanterns, that to market, quite often the blocker is the fact that the distributors can't afford to buy a container load of product. They don't have the line of credit before they get it to the customer. If you provide a revolving capital pool to finance that and it gets paid back, you can recycle development money time and time again. So in that case, you're actually going to foundations or governments or whoever to get development money, but you're saying you can have more impact. So you're selling it in on the basis that the same money can revolve multiple times. I mean, I completely understand. I've hit on some examples where we found things that work. There will be some cases where, you really need governments to step up and provide some infrastructure as well. But then it's, again, I would suggest it's about to the benefit of. You're providing this business infrastructure, fiscal setups, all these sorts of things to enable social enterprises to create entrepreneurs, to create wealth, to create impact. But it's about looking at the space and slicing it up into who are the appropriate providers of what piece and why would they be supporting it. And it's almost, to me, the same thought process as if I'm looking at the entrepreneur who builds the product.